The dangerous catfish. I was 14 at the time of this story in 2008. World of Warcraft, MySpace, Blogger. The internet in its prime. The internet was sort of my only lifeline.
My dad was a violent drunk.
He was a Christian fundamentalist, meaning we went to church 3 times a week minimum, and everything was very fire and brimstone with him. He ruled the house with an iron fist if me or my mom acted bad. It was him screaming in our faces for hours at best, or getting beat the fuck up by this drunk bozo at worst. He was a narcissist who manipulated and never took accountability for his actions. I love my mother, but she was weak. She cried all the time. She depended on me for her emotional needs. All this to say, they barely raised me.
I minimized every feeling I had,
and became very sneaky to get around the oppressive, abusive atmosphere. I was desperate for something that would make me feel like a real person. We lived in a 1BR apartment. What the fuck, right? It was a really hard age to have no privacy. I had no privacy, no internet, no cable, no books where I might accidentally catch a glimpse of a nipple, nothing. They believed in a whole lot of sins that would apparently not happen to me if I had no room or privacy to do anything. They were very restrictive about media in that way. Music and books, and certainly movies. The good news is that our apartment was directly over a cafe that had a few desktop computers that
were available for
use.
I spent a lot of time down there doing school projects. Really, I was playing World of Warcraft,
which just
released a new expansion pack that was fucking sweet.
Or working on a cool custom layout for my MySpace profile. Or commenting on cute girls' pictures on MySpace or Blogger or wherever I could find them. It was my escape. Luckily, most of the employees at the cafe were my age or just a little older, and they didn't care what the hell I did there.
Some of them even became kind of buddies with me.
Like Frank, the cashier who was working his way through community college. One day, after school, after checking in with my parents to make sure nothing was on fire and I wasn't in trouble, I went down to the cafe and sat down at my usual computer.
I had a friend request on MySpace from a girl I'd
never seen before. She was really interesting. XXXRAWREDGYXXXXX or something stupid like that was her username. And I remember her pictures being so different than other girls I had seen. She had long, jet black hair that she pinned at the side to create a heavy side-swept bang that covered her whole face. That wasn't the unique part. The unique part was that instead of having selfies with dumb angles, she had pictures that looked professional, not in a model way. Now that I'm older, I can positively identify these as modern glamour shots. I guess I should have thought it was weird, but in these pictures she was leaning on some shitty Halloween decorations, and she had a beautiful, curvy body, and her face was glowy and hauntingly beautiful. She was wearing clothes typical for the time, which is embarrassing now, because it was like striped fingerless gloves and skinny jeans type of shit. She lived in my town, and she was my age. I couldn't believe my luck. We started to talk, and it was unbelievable. She knew exactly what to say to me. She, too, was an avid WoW player, down to the same class and race as me. She had a similar if not exact taste in music. She said that her parents were also Christian fundamentalists. Her real name was Mary. Mary also was being abused at home. I asked her why I never saw her in school, and she said it's because she was homeschooled by her parents. We talked every day for 2 weeks before we made secret plans to meet.
I felt like Romeo and Juliet.
Like star-crossed lovers. The plan was simple. We'd wait until Sunday after church and I would ask my parents if we could go to the cafe to work on a project for Monday, and she would tell her parents that she was going to meet with her Girl Scout troop. And then we would meet at the cafe. It was time to meet Mary. I waited. An hour went by. My heart started to break. I knew I'd have to go home in 30 or 45 minutes tops. That's when Mary walked in. She looked different than I thought. It's hard to explain. She looked Asian, which I didn't notice in her pictures. And she was taller than me by 4 inches. She was curvy and a little bit chubby, which I also didn't notice in her pictures. Her bangs really did cover like half of her face,
which was so pale I
couldn't believe it. We didn't miss a beat. We got along great.
She was very forward about her sexual desires for me.
I had a huge pubescent boner for her, in my pants and heart. She was my first love. She was beautiful. We hung out for 30 minutes before I had to go. We continued meeting like this as often as we could. It was like a dream. Until one day when we made plans to meet up and I got stuck late at a Bible study group, which made me 10 minutes late for meeting with Mary. I ran straight from the Bible study and took back streets to cut down on some time.
2 blocks away,
I saw a black Oldsmobile pull over and park, and I saw Mary get out.
I did a double take, it was her.
I stopped and watched her start to walk up. I called out her name. When she saw me, she instantly started to cry and say she was sorry. She tried to go back to the car,
but I
put myself in her way and asked her what the fuck. Mary sobbed and broke down in my arms. She told me that she had been lying to me. She was actually 17, not 14, and she had her driver's license. I comforted her and we sat in the car together for a while. I won't go into detail, but I had my first sexual encounter that day. Mary made me really happy, I'll say. The next week, we had the same plan, except we just meet in her car instead, and we fooled around. This was the first time I saw a naked woman. She had a harsh scar above her foot area.
When she saw me notice it,
she covered up, cried and said that it was a result of abuse. She would never let me touch her. She was just always very giving with me. After that, we just semi-cuddled with the seats reclined, and we had a deep conversation.
I told her about how
I didn't have any privacy, how my parents controlled me. We cried together, and then she said, as cold as ice, "We should kill your parents." Mary was always intense. She said some really intense things to me about how our love was like the sun and that kind of bullshit. But even for Mary, that was a really extreme thing to say. My mind raced. She kept talking about how she
could help me kill them.
She could bring me what I needed to make sure that they were dead. It would look like murder. Suicide. If my parents were gone, we could keep each other safe and we could run away together. I felt sick. I got myself together and sat up. When I realized it was also at least an hour later than I told my parents I'd be home,
I started to panic.
And I told Mary the first had to go. She started to cry, but I got out of her car and ran back to my house. My dad had already been down to the cafe and found out that I wasn't there, and he was pissed. When I got home,
my dad
was lost in a rage. I got beat that night, and it only got worse when my parents saw the hickey on my neck. It stung. You know, when you're a kid and something like that happens, all you think is, please stop. I don't want to make it about that. I just want you to know how in trouble I was. No more cafe. My social life, already non-existent, was even less than it was before.
Same with my privacy.
I wasn't able to go anywhere without one of my parents for a long time, for like over a year. By the time I got on MySpace again, Mary's profile was gone. It was like she never existed. Frank didn't talk to me anymore when I was finally allowed to go back to the cafe again. He dodged all questions about Mary. Frank didn't like
me anymore.
I moved out at 18, and years went by.
I forgot about Mary.
In a sense, I stopped talking to my parents.
That
was painful.
Then COVID hit.
My dad is disabled and my mother's job laid her off. They still live in the apartment, and since they were such long-term tenants. Their landlord worked something out with them. My mother reached out to me 2 months ago to ask me to help them pay off a lump sum,
in turn to be forgiven for the rest of the balance.
I agreed, and my mother said that she'd get in touch with the landlord and then let me know where to make the payment. The next day, I was told to meet the landlord in the cafe downstairs. I got there and was annoyed the landlord wasn't there on time. I was on edge even being there. It brought back a lot of memories, although it was completely remodeled inside to a shitty coffee chain. That's when the landlord walked in. She was the same height as me.
She had jet black hair.
She was Asian. She was chubby, curvy. She was at least 40. When she looked at me, I almost shit my pants. It was Mary. It was definitely Mary. Mary, quote, "No, my name is Kim. Nice to meet you, Anon." I was so flustered. She knew my name. I gave her the envelope, and she wrote me a receipt on one of those receipt books. I stared at her while she filled out the details and almost exactly in
tune with me.
She broke into a sweat. She gave me a copy and rushed out of the cafe. I watched her get into a black Oldsmobile and drive away. The same Oldsmobile she drove 13 years earlier. The same Oldsmobile where my unit made its way into a vessel for the first time. I found out that I didn't tell Kim my name in the texts between the two of them.
She called me her son and not by my
name. Not sure if Mom told her my name earlier when I lived there years ago, or if maybe it was mentioned before. It doesn't matter. The truth is obvious and painful.
This woman probably looked at the history on the computer I used.
From there, she created that MySpace.
She looked young
for her age. Maybe she went shopping and changed her hair. The glamour shots were what she thought was cool, because she was fucking old. Once we were MySpace friends, she saw my favorite bands and interests.
It was easy for her to figure out
what I was into, and just mirrored that back to me. As my parents' landlord, she probably knew they had problems, and she mirrored that to me, too. She did the classic trademark of liars. Let me catch her in a smaller lie and admit to that. To satisfy my this person is lying feeling without actually stopping her lying. The first time I saw a C-section scar, I screamed internally. She didn't have a horrific scar from childhood abuse. She had a fucking C-section. That's why she never let me explore her. She just looked young in the face. Even last I saw her,
she still looked young for 40.
Which makes me feel sick thinking that she could actually be older than 40 now. I never felt like Mary harmed me at all until I met her again. I hope I never see her again in my life. And that's the story of how a landlord groomed me through the internet to prey on me in her shitty old car, which she maybe taunted me with 13 years later when I realized that she was actually a predator who was dramatically older.
Then she told me she
was.
The thing that haunts me is the last time I saw her way back then.
If I said, yes, I want you to help me kill my parents, what the fuck would have happened? I feel like she would have kept me in a basement forever. Or just let me go down for the murders so that I didn't get her in trouble. There are monsters out there. Sometimes more human than you'd expect, and way closer than you think.